So we're going to take a break from JavaScript talks. We had 3 JavaScript talks. Now we're going to talk about some CSS. So introduce Jonathan.
Cool. Alrighty, let me see here. Okay. Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? So far, so good? Okay. You ready to eat? Hungry? Yeah? Yeah? That's the shame because I'm going to talk for like 3 hours. Just kidding. Yeah, right. I'm not going to talk for 3 hours. I'd be dead. Cool. What I am going to talk to you about is our future in code, specifically front-end code. We have heard some really good talks about JavaScript stuff, and I'll be totally honest, JavaScript is probably my weakest link. So some of those I was like, yeah, that's cool. No idea how to do that. But yeah, that's cool. And seriously, major props to Matt for doing what I am never bold enough to do, which is to do a live demo of something. That takes serious balls. So I'll just be showing you things today. I won't be trying to write anything. But I do want to talk to you about where the front end of the web is going and how we need to kind of like go with that. And this applies whether you do back-end stuff, whether you are like a JavaScript guru and all you want to do is build Node apps all day long. The front end of this stuff is actually going to be important. And the reason is that the future of how we're going to have to interact with this is already here. The future of the web is happening like right now. The way that people use the web, the way the web is changing, is something that's occurring right in front of our faces like right this second. It's actually really, really super exciting. And the reason that it's changing so dramatically is because of things like this. So funny picture. It's, her name is Liza Gardner. She's a pretty entertaining person. But this is her hugging a huge pile of devices. All of these devices are what's forcing this change on the web. It's forcing how we build for the web. It's forcing how the web works. It's forcing people to change the way they use digital products and the way they use digital technology. This picture is actually, it's a good picture because it's just sort of this pile of devices. This picture is kind of a lie because the person in the picture and the person who took the picture are both big Apple fanboys. So really, it's a picture of how much they love Apple devices, which is all of those. There's a couple of lonely Kindles and Droids and such in there, but for the most part, it's a big pile of Apple devices. This is a thing that's happening like right this second, though. Mobile users in the US are going to outnumber desktop next year. We are here. We will be here very, very soon. This was originally predicted to be about 2015. It's going to be in about 9 months, 10 months now. So this is actually just getting faster and faster and faster. And that's in the US, which ironically is actually behind a number of places. In Africa and Asia, it's already significantly greater than 50% is on mobile devices as opposed to more traditional desktops or laptops. In places like Africa, it's actually fascinating because when we say mobile devices for them too, we're not really talking about these. We're not talking about iPhones. We're not talking about things like that. We're talking about like feature phones. And they use them to do things like banking because there's plenty of places that don't have banks. So mobile traffic is critical in places like that. Like it's just operationally critical. But the entire digital ecosystem of the world is actually changing to these devices very, very, very rapidly. So holy crap, we actually have to build for these things. Like this is not something that we can ignore anymore. So for a long time, especially if you're, I would say, if you're a more traditional designer-y type, especially like a web designer, you don't really like to think too much about all these different devices because there's so many variables and we're all control freaks. I'm a control freak. So it's a little bit tricky. But not considering these devices is, seriously, it's a death sentence. If you're not thinking about how the stuff you're working on is going to work on a phone, how it's going to work on a tablet, how it's going to work on the little in-between tablet thing that Google announced yesterday, or on a Kindle, or on a BlackBerry, or on a blah, 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 blah. If you're not thinking about all those things, then in the space of a year, 2 years, it's really not going to matter what you were thinking about because you'll be working for someone else, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's plenty of cool places to work, but it won't be on what you think it's on. So these things have to be considered, and we've only barely started solving this, actually. The entire world of designing for these devices, real design for these devices, is being shaped like right now, and we're just getting into it. So this is a very exciting time to be into it. So before I go any further, hi. My name is Jonathan Smiley. I'm from Zurb. We're a product design agency down in Campbell, so about half an hour south of here, next to Cupertino. We've been around for about 14 years. We've worked with over 200 startups and created a lot of money and exits for those clients. Granted, we didn't see nearly enough of that money, but they saw a lot of money, so that's good for them, I guess. We've had the chance to work with some pretty big names, which is actually pretty exciting for us. Facebook and eBay, Yahoo. We actually worked with eBay, and someone from eBay was speaking here. Some of the bigger players. And this is cool, not because we just like to brag about ourselves, although we do. We do like to brag about ourselves. But actually because we've had a chance to see how their approach is evolving, how the approach that startups are taking is evolving. We've had a chance to shape some of that as we get into this sort of multi-device world. So it's pretty exciting for us. So what are we actually getting ourselves into? Mobile's a pretty wide field. There's a lot going on there. You can more or less boil it down into a couple of things. You can boil it down into sort of two worlds, I suppose. The web, which is what we had originally. When these devices came out, when smartphones, as we really would consider them today, when smartphones came to the fore, what we were really looking at was web. And in fact, when the original iPhone came out, Apple's position was everything will be done for the web. Apps can suck it. We're never going to do native apps. They obviously changed their tune quite a bit. But that was definitely their position, was that the web was going to win everything. So that's more or less where we started. And then we got to where we could add in apps. So there became this gigantic app ecosystem. Native apps, iOS apps, Android apps, Windows Phone apps. Native apps that actually have different capabilities. They could do a little more, especially than the web. Definitely about 3 or 4 years ago, there was really no contest between their capabilities and their performance and things of that nature. Now, we have sort of these two worlds right now. What I'm going to say to you today is that apps are going to die. Apps are going to lose. The web is going to win. At the end of the day, the web is going to win. And when I say the web is going to win, I really mean the responsive web. So a web, an interface, a way of interacting with these devices that adapts itself to all of these different types of devices, to all these different form factors, all these different screens, all these different capabilities, all the different stuff that they can do. The web is going to win. Now, why do I say responsive design? Well, responsive design is the only way you can approach this stuff that scales. So think about like HTC. You guys all know who HTC is? Some of you probably have an HTC device. They make Android stuff. This is a representation of just how many screen sizes or resolutions you could have to worry about if you were only looking at HTC Android phones. That does not include any of the 28 other manufacturers of Android devices. That does not include tablets, iPads, iPhones, computers. It doesn't include Kindles. It doesn't include WebOS, BlackBerry. It doesn't include any of those. There are thousands of these things. The variables are staggering. So if you actually try to build something for specific devices, if you want to build your thing so that it's, I built it just for this, you will get just those customers and never anyone else because your stuff just won't work. So you have to build things responsively, which means you have to build them in a way that they scale themselves, that they work across these different kinds of devices. And I keep saying devices. Right now, I'm not even really talking about the devices themselves. I'm not even really talking about devices. We're really talking about 4 corners. We're designing for 4 corners. Everything is 4 corners. A phone, for now. A phone is, so normally this gets, these things get projected on screens. So there's actually a border, and there's no border on the wall, so this is a little abstract. But normally you have sort of a phone, which is a smaller thing. You have larger screens, you have larger devices where the screen gets bigger and things of that nature. When we're just talking about screens, we're really talking about 4 corners. Now, there's also orientation, rotation, location, sight, sound, all the other capabilities that these little boxes have, which is pretty amazing, actually, if you consider it. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to worry about screens for the moment. So I'm not crazy. Apps do valuable things. Everybody likes apps. Everybody's got Angry Birds. Everybody loves their apps. So really what's going to win in the end is the responsive web plus just a dash of application, just a dash of native stuff, because we need a way to hook into the devices. And you can see this now if you look at, especially like Facebook or actually later today LinkedIn. I know someone from LinkedIn is speaking. And you're looking at basically apps, native apps, that are almost entirely web content. And that's because it's reusable, it scales, they can use it in all kinds of different places. The Facebook app, I know, some of the stuff that shows up on your phone is the same stuff that they'll show you in their tablet app, which is the same stuff they'll show you on the web. So they're reducing their development time, they're reducing their problems, basically, and they're broadening their audience, they're broadening their scope by doing a responsive web implementation with just a dash of application. But like I said, we're just going to worry about 10 or 12 things at once. There's way too many things to worry about here for us to just get into everything all at the same time. I could be up here all day talking and we wouldn't really get anything done. Now to do this, to actually get this stuff done, we need tools. We need stuff that's actually out there that's going to help us get the job done. And I'll say, put your helmet on because there's some blatant self-promotion coming up. But it's okay, it's good stuff. So at Zurb, we realized about a year ago, just over a year ago, that if responsive design was the way these things were going to go, we needed a responsive framework. We needed something that would actually help us build sites, build apps, build stuff for our clients, because we work with a lot of clients and a lot of clients at the same time. We needed a framework that was actually going to help us get that done. Because things like this, now granted, if you're not a visual designer, if you don't do like graphic design at all, this might not be incredibly familiar. This is what we used to do in visual design when we wanted to make a new website. We'd go into Photoshop and we'd say, this is my new awesome website, and it's 1,000 pixels wide, and it's 900 pixels high. And then I'll put some beautiful pixels on it, and I'll be like, oh, yeah, this is done, and it's really beautiful. This is absolutely not good enough. because this 1,000 pixel, 900 pixel, 940 pixel, 960 grid, blah, 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 that stuff is all dead. That stuff is irrelevant. Those aren't real devices anymore. Those aren't things that people actually use. I mean, a few people use them, but everyone doesn't. Most people don't. So this is absolutely just not good enough. We're going to have to do better than this. When I'm really feeling on game, I'll try to do my Picard impression. It's not very good, so I'm not going to try. But it's just absolutely not good enough. We need to have designs. We need to be building things and designing things so that we can try them here, and we can try them here, and we can try them here, and we can try them basically everywhere else. And that is why we built Foundation, which is at foundation.zurb.com. And I know, because I've been sitting in the back the whole time, that almost all of you have computers in front of you, so you just pull things up immediately. You're welcome to go to foundation.zurb.com and poke around. I will go ahead and tell you that we are right in the middle of deploying a really large update to it, and it might be the old one or it might be the new one. I have no idea, because I'm not in front of it and I'm talking to you. So I don't know what you're going to see. Either way, it'll be good stuff. Just if it says Foundation 2, it's not the new stuff yet. Anybody actually have it up? Is it? Damn it. It'll be the new stuff really soon. But that is why we built Foundation, because we needed a framework for doing responsive design. Now, Foundation is an open source responsive framework. It's entirely MIT licensed. It's all on GitHub. The whole thing is free to do basically whatever you'd like. Just ideally not sell it to people as your own. We would not appreciate that. Other than that, it is entirely open source and free to use. And it's made up of a few components, things that actually help us get stuff done quickly. For one thing, it has a almost freakishly robust grid for doing fluid responsive designs. So the grid is a 12-column. It's nestable. If you've ever used a grid system like Blueprint or Bootstrap or anything like that, you'll feel right at home. But it allows you to do very, very quick layout of fairly complex pages, which is pretty nice. When you're building a lot of stuff, this pertains to applications or marketing sites or anything really. It's pretty handy. And it has a ton of just interface elements. So things like buttons, typography, pagination, tabs, navigation, all the bits and pieces basically that you need to assemble an interface that you can then test on all kinds of different devices. An interface that you can prototype, that you can iterate on, that you can pull up on your phone or pull up on your tablet or pull up on your computer or pull up on your TV, whatever. All the bits and pieces that you need to put that together. And like I said, it's all entirely responsive. So the whole thing was designed from the ground up so that everything would work well and work nicely no matter what kind of screen, no matter what size screen, no matter what kind of device you pulled it up on. It's tested pretty robustly across a lot of different devices. There are a few holdouts that we don't or can't test necessarily. By and large, it is pretty bulletproof, so you can use it with impunity. I'm not going to do a live demo, but I will try to check it out really quick. I'm pretty excited about it today because, like I said, today is our big, big launch. So I'm actually going to show you, I'll show you real quick. I'm going to walk you through some of the bits and pieces for Foundation 3, which is what's coming out today. I'm going to show it to you on our staging server because it's apparently not on the live server yet. But I'm pretty stoked about this today, so let me go ahead and switch over to that. Alrighty. What? That washes itself right out. Cool. It's all right. You'll be able to read the documentation. So this is what the Foundation website will look like later today when you pull it up and everything's launched and working the way it's supposed to. It's got a whole site built around it with features and case studies and things of that nature. This is a pretty techie audience, I know. Got a lot of nerds in here, which is cool. I'm a nerd. So I'm just going to jump right into the documentation because that's where all the sexy is anyways. The documentation for Foundation is pretty robust. There's a whole lot of stuff in here, but I'm just going to show you a few examples of how some of this stuff works. So I'll start with the grid. So if you've ever used a grid system before, like Blueprint or like, goodness, there's tons and tons of grid systems out there, it should be fairly familiar to you, but the basic gist of it is actually this page is a perfect example. To do a layout like this page, all I have to do is create a row, one big row, div class row, and then I do 2 columns and 6 columns. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what they are. 2 columns and 6 columns and 4 columns. So it's a 12-column grid, so I divide that up into 3 chunks. And that actually takes care of this being as long as it needs to, this being as long as it needs to, this being as long as it needs to. It just sort of handles it for me. But like I said, it's nestable. So if I go back to the homepage here, you can see down here that I have these other columns. This is because I created a row here, and I did 6 columns and 6 columns. So it just nests and nests and nests. If you play around with that a little bit, if you've never used a grid system before, I'd encourage you to at least try it out. When it comes to actually prototyping a layout, prototyping a site or an application, there is almost no faster way to do this. It's incredibly fast. You can put together very, very complex layouts very, very quickly. we use it for almost everything that we do. So the grid itself, like I said, it's pretty simple. You can actually see what the syntax looks like here. Let me blow this up a little bit so you can hopefully read it. There we go. Div class row, div class 8 columns, content. Div class 4 columns, sidebar content, close it out. It's very, very, very simple. There's just not a whole lot to it. It's quite easy to wrangle. And when you start putting rows inside those columns and rows inside those columns, that's when you get to the complicated stuff where you can really start nesting it down. I'll run you through just a couple of other things that are in here. I mean, the grid itself supports all kinds of stuff. Like I said, it's got nesting. You can't see the divisions in them, but there is an indication of what they all look like. You can do things like offsets. You can center your columns. You can do source ordering if you're a huge nerd like me and you want to be able to do things like source ordering where you reverse the order of your columns so that when they get printed out in order, they're in the right order. You can do things like that. And there's actually a mobile grid as well, so you can use a different set of columns on very small devices if you need to. But the grid is just one facet of this. There's all kinds of stuff in here, like buttons. If you need buttons, they're just anchors. They're literally anchors where you put classes like small button, small success button, large alert button. Very, very, very simple stuff. You can put them on anchors. You can put them on inputs, on submission things, on buttons and forms, whatever works for you. Forms themselves are, if you've ever tried to design like complicated forms for the web or lay them out in some sort of nice way, you know that it just sucks. It just blows. It's just really, really annoying and not very fun. So we tried to simplify that a great deal. It's lamentable that the subtleties of this get washed out a bit by the projector. There are actually lines around these inputs. You just can't see them. But we've set it up so that basically you can use the grid to lay out your forms very cleanly. It takes care of all the spacing and all of the alignment and everything for you. You can do very, very complicated things with the forms, which is pretty nice because I know forms just suck. Navigation, nav bars, things like that, anything that you need like that. Tabs, if you want to be able to tab through content, tab through stuff. And then tons of just different elements. This is one that I'll mention because it's really interesting, and I know developers especially tend to really like this kind of thing. We have this stuff in there called visibility classes, which is basically if there's things that you don't want shown on a particular screen size, or you do want shown only for a particular screen size, or you don't want them shown in a particular orientation, we have classes set up where you can basically just say show for large screens, hide for medium screens, hide for small screens. You can say show for landscape or show for portrait. You can say show for touch or hide for touch if you want to turn on particular controls or turn off particular controls because it's a touch device or not a touch device. We wanted all this to be very, very easy to set up just through markup, actually, just through the markup that I throw in here, because this helps us prototype things very, very rapidly. We don't have to overthink anything. If something doesn't work on a small device, we just turn it off and we turn on something else. We turn on another element that gets the job done for us. And this is actually how we evaluate that a prototype is working. So there's all kinds of visibility things, and then there's just other bits and pieces, alerts, labels, tooltips, if you need to have tooltips on stuff. Panels, if you just want to, encapsulate some of your content, granted that panel just disappears. The other one you can see. Lists of links. There's just a whole lot of stuff in there. There's a few JavaScript plugins to do things like sliders, which actually, building a responsive slider is actually kind of a nightmare. So if you need a slider for anything, you should take advantage of the fact that we went through all of that pain for you. It was a great deal of pain. Reveal, which is our plugin for doing modal dialogues, like so. Whee! All of that stuff is very, very easy to hook up. In fact, to actually get these modals and stuff working, you don't actually even have to write any JavaScript. Now, I know this is a pretty JavaScript-heavy crowd, so you probably like writing JavaScript. I don't. So I like not having to write JavaScript. But this is the documentation. This is everything that's thrown in there for Foundation 3. We've got code examples and everything in there. Like I said, this particular documentation will be up a little bit later today. There is a documentation site there now, which is not remarkably different than this. We've done a lot of changes for 3, but in terms of the syntax, it's not dramatically different. So that's a little bit of what we've got going on for Foundation 3. We're pretty stoked about it. I'm crossing my fingers that by the time I finish talking, it'll be live. I know our engineer is cranking through it right now. And purely as a funny aside, because I think it's funny, is that our engineer who's cranking on it right now, his twin brother is in the audience. So when I came in here and sat down, I was like, he's supposed to be working on my code. What's he doing here? And then I realized it's not him, it's his brother. So he's working on that, but whoa, that was interesting. So let me jump back to the actual prezo. So that's a little bit of what's actually going on in Foundation 3. So why build it? We've been working on Foundation now. This is the 3rd major iteration of Foundation. It's the 2nd one that's been public. And we've been working on it for well over a year. We've been working on it for a year and a half, probably at this point. So why did we actually do it? I mean, not that because it's awesome isn't reason enough. We've been known to do things like that before. But we did have goals in mind for why we did this and what we wanted to bring to other people. For one thing, we wanted just faster development. Like I said, at Zurb, we work with a lot of clients simultaneously. We need to be able to build things very quickly and build them well. So we needed tools to help us do that. We wanted to build stuff faster. We also just wanted less QA. So when we build everything on top of Foundation, when we as a company build everything on top of Foundation, we know that the core stuff for that is going to work everywhere we need it to work because we just tested the crap out of it. I hate spending a bunch of time in IE 7, 8, whatever, trying to get all this crap to work. I hate getting into Android and trying to get their JavaScript stuff to behave. I hate doing all of that. So we avoid all of that by working from a standard set of code that we've already tested and done all that work for. And we wanted to get ready for the future. So when we first started working on this, responsive was like just barely starting to happen. The first article about responsive web design by Ethan Marcotte came out just over 2 years ago. And it took a good year for that to get any traction, honestly. And actually, at this point, it's got so much traction that just today, Microsoft announced that their new site is going to be responsive. So they've gone responsive. Sony's now responsive. Responsive is actually like a real thing. Don't hold your breath for Apple to go responsive. It doesn't support their narrative of the full web. But they probably would if they could. So we wanted to be ready for that. And really, got to get ready for the future because it's just 3 years till we have hoverboards, right? You know? That's seriously only 3 years away. That's 2015. Bet you didn't remember that. Huh? And a few months. Well, you know, sure. So what did we actually get? So we wanted all those things. We wanted to build faster. We wanted less QA. What did we actually get? Well, we did get all those things, so that's cool. We did build faster. We did do less QA. We were ready for the future. We were ready for where our clients wanted to go and where we wanted our clients to go, which was nice. We also got faster training. So when we hire designers, it is hard enough to train them up in how to do everything in a Zurb kind of way, to do our client stuff in a Zurb kind of way, to do internal stuff that way, without having to worry about bringing them up to speed on how we do all of our code, or how we, you know, how this person does code and how this person does code, and have different designers doing different things, and da-da-da-da-da. We were able to standardize around using Foundation as a company for everything that we do, including for our clients, which means that when we bring on new people, we just have to, as a unit, teach them how to use Foundation, which is not that hard. So that really, really helped things for us. Come on, buddy, come back. Sorry, I'm using my phone to control Keynote, and it occasionally loses the connection. There we go. We also wanted just better code literacy for the whole team. So this is not just engineers and designers. Foundation is actually pretty easy to use. We actually do classes for the entire team, anybody who's interested in coming. Now, granted, Zurb is only 21 people, so we're not talking like thousands or anything. But like biz dev, marketing, operations, everybody is actually reasonably comfortable with Foundation. Which, it's not like we have them doing a bunch of code all the time. It's not like they need to create a bunch of web pages. But when we do need to talk about it, when we need to talk to clients, when we need to talk about how we're going to structure projects, they understand enough of how this works. They understand how our process works specifically for the code so that we can all get things done really well. And we could very, very easily move between projects. Code standards are sexy because, like, you know, if I'm working on a project and somebody else is working on a project and theirs is huge and mine is tiny and I want to like get in there and help them, if they're working on completely different code, I can't really do that. The ramp up is just a nightmare. So by standardizing around all of this, we're able to move people between projects very, very quickly. People can chip in on things. People understand where they're going to be starting from because we're all starting from the same place. So that's been hugely helpful. So what we learned from all this is that the future needs tools. We developed Foundation to be a tool for this. The future of where the web is going needs tools, which means that you need tools. In order to be working in this space and to keep pushing in this space and to move forward in this space, you need tools. Tools like, not like that, not that kind of tools. Not that kind of tools, that's Tool the Band. Tools like Foundation. Yeah, I went a long ways for that joke, didn't I? Yeah, I'll tell you what, the most painful part of that was actually getting on Google Images and finding a sufficiently high-res image of Jersey Shore. I don't recommend it. That is an ugly group of people. So front-end tools like Foundation are what we need. So think about other types of development. We're talking about the web. We're talking about the front of the web. But think about other types of development. So I'm a huge nerd. I've said that a number of times. I'm quite a gamer. I like to play a lot of games. So I can actually remember things like this. Zork. Anybody remember Zork? Yeah? Zork? Zork 1, 2, 3? I'm sure some of you are looking at me going, does he remember Zork? I'm actually older than I look. So think about this, which was a great game, very simple. And then think about things like this, which is coming out later this year. This is the new Assassin's Creed. Both games, you know, separated by, what, probably 20 years, I would guess. And the way we managed to get to this point, to the point where we can, like, good Lord, just look at that. It's absurd. 30 years, thank you. So a little while. But to get to this point, we had to change our tools. We had to build up our tools because you can do a lot with assembly, but you can't do the new Assassin's Creed in assembly. It doesn't matter how many of you there are, how much work you're going to try to do. It'll take you until you're dead. So we needed to keep building tools on top of that and build tools on top of that and build tools on top of that until we reached tools like Xcode or like things that actually allow us to very quickly build complicated things. It's this rapidly escalating progression of tools built on the previous generation's tools to help us do more and more and more. So we need these tools on the web too, not just for the front end, we need them for the back end. The original web was all static HTML. You pull up the original World Wide Web, it's all just static stuff. That is a far cry from Rails apps or Node.js apps or things of that nature. The tools that we have for the back end have evolved tremendously over that period of time. We've gone from just static HTML, we had Perl and Python, we had PHP, we had ASP, we had Java stuff going. Now we're into like JavaScript servers and we're into big Rails apps and things like that. The tools have gotten much, much better. Well, what did we get on the front end? Well, we got Dreamweaver, I guess, and we got Flash, which was okay, and we got UI and things like that, which was, it's all just kind of meh. Like the tool set that we've been working from for the front end of the web, for the actual what we show through a browser, what we show through a device, is not dramatically different. If I was going to, even as little as like 2 years ago, if I was going to write a new website for somebody, I would be basically starting from maybe a reset if I was really, if I wanted to pull in some stuff. Maybe you can throw in stuff like Modernizer and things that help like that. But the tool set has not evolved a tremendous amount. We're still kind of working from the same space. I mean, there's things like, I guess there's things like jQuery Mobile. If you're going to do a mobile app, that's really a framework for doing a very specific kind of mobile app, which is good. That is a tool, and that has led to some new stuff. But by and large, like this space has been, meh. It's been uninspiring. So we're trying to change that. And a few years ago, we started to get some more tools, things like Blueprint. Some of you have probably seen Blueprint or used Blueprint. It was tremendously popular for a very long time. Those things were great. Now they're dead. Things that are built around a fixed grid system, things that were 960 grids, things of that nature, are dead. They're no longer relevant. They don't work on here. They don't work on tablets, really. They won't work on that computer. They won't work on someone's TV. They won't work in their car. They won't work on their fancy Google glasses. They won't work any of those places. We'll see if those Google glasses start to look any cooler, because right now no one's going to wear them. So they were good, but they're dead. So now we're getting some new tools. The tools are actually starting to evolve again, just specifically in like the responsive front-end space. But we really have to keep going. So how do we actually move forward quickly, like in this really awesome image? I almost had no other reason to use this image except that I just thought it was really cool. So how do we actually move forward? For one thing, start with a framework. Always start with a framework. I like Foundation. There are others. They're not up here talking to you, so I'm just going to say start with Foundation. But you should start with a framework. You can't do it all every time. You can't start from scratch every time. And most of you probably know that already, because most of you are more than happy to use tools to get the job done. I'm going to pick on you because you're sitting right in front, wearing a MongoDB shirt. It's like, I will use MongoDB. You do not have to build your own database from scratch. You can use Node. You can use all these other tools. Use a framework. That includes the front end. Use a framework for the front end. You've got to remove as much of the doing the work that's already been done over again as you can, or you won't be able to move forward fast enough. And I do mean you need to move forward fast, because this is not slowing down. This is speeding up very, very quickly. So start with a framework. Once you have a framework in place, you can build a coded style guide. Now, coded style guides are something we've been doing at Zurb for our clients for years. They are tremendously useful. We do them for ourselves. We do them for others. I'll show you real quick what we're talking about here, but this is something that as an organization or as a company, you should absolutely consider doing, and really you should just do. So let me show you what that looks like real quick. I'll zoom this in a little bit. There we go. This is a style guide that we did for a client of ours called Terracotta. This is a coded style guide. So style guides are nothing new. All kinds of companies have like branding guidelines and sort of style guides for an organization. A coded style guide was actually something that we've been doing and that now we build on top of Foundation. So we start with Foundation, which, haha, it's like it's the foundation. That's why we called it that. And then we build a style guide on top of that. We build a coded style guide for our clients or for ourselves, which includes things like what colors do you use? How do you actually build a button? What does a button look like? What's the markup for a button? How do you restyle those? What does all the typography look like? When should you use them? How do you do emphasis or block quotes? How do you create lists? How do you do forms? What's their sexual structure look like? Tables are uninspiring, but they have to be there. How do you use the grid? The grid that I talked about in Foundation, how do you actually use it to do layout? And we give all these tools to our clients because they need to be able to take this stuff and run with them, because there's another layer on top of the style guide which is where you add in all that special sauce, all the awesome stuff that makes your site or your application really stand out. It's all the stuff that you build on top of this. So this is like a layered kind of approach. That's one we did for Terracotta. Here's one we did for a company called Blue Jeans. It's a similar sort of thing. For a lot of these, we'll do things like page layouts. How do you actually do the page layout? What are those layouts? Those are very, very light, but they are there. How do you maintain your CSS? This is another one that we did for a company called Venue, which is, wow, that text is tiny, is one that we did for those guys. And then I'll show you one last one, which is, this is the one that we did for Felix, which was quite recent, actually. It's a style guide we did for those guys. Which, again, this is all built on top of Chrome does a weird little thing when I scale this. Which is all stuff that we built on top of Foundation. So this is entirely based on Foundation 2, not 3, because 3 is just now coming out. But this is the stuff that we build on top of that for our clients. And this is stuff that you should be considering doing for yourselves. Because if you're a one-man show, this is not as necessary. If you're a one-man show, or one-woman show, I'm sorry, if you're a one-person show, you don't necessarily need a style guide to keep consistency with yourself. You can generally be reasonably consistent with yourself. That's not to say that it would be useless. It's actually quite handy in terms of defining patterns and making sure that you stay consistent. But it's less important then. If you're working with a team, this is critical. Like, you can't reasonably get consistent, well-designed stuff done without a standard space for all of you to start from. And Foundation by itself is part of that. The style guide is what makes it yours, and that's what you build on top of it. So again, these guys' style guide was pretty robust. We included a lot of stuff about how to actually just get it done. And we handed it over to these guys so that they could keep building stuff, so they could keep building on top of it and keep building their site. Let me jump back over here. So with a style guide in place, once you actually have that going, you can really build something amazing. You have the framework, which gets you the starting point. You have the style guide, which makes it yours. And then you build on top of that to put together something really, really amazing. There are a few things to remember while you build on the front end. If you're not like a front end kind of guy, I'll say these things for you. If you are, you probably already know these. But for one thing, write clean code. This applies no matter what. But if you're going to have multiple people working on something, or even if you want to be able to work on it later, clean code is absolutely required. Like you just have to be very, very rigid about doing things the right way, about doing things in a smart way, about doing things in a way that you can read later, things of that nature. So please, please, please write clean code. Indent properly. I'm sure most of you guys know this, especially if you do JavaScript stuff, because you really have to do this. If I had $1 for every time I had to go to one of my designers at Zurb and tell them to change their indentation, I don't know exactly how much money I would have, but I could buy lunches maybe or something. I don't know. I'd have some money. Indentation is actually, it's surprisingly easy to do, and it's surprisingly easy to screw up, and it's just such a simple thing to do that actually makes your code readable and manageable, and you can actually get back into it later. I would say no HTML and CSS, so HTML5, CSS3, like a ninja knows his, I don't know, nunchucks or throwing stars, or I'm not a ninja, whatever ninjas know really well. No HTML and CSS in that same sort of way. If you're going to be building for the front end, these tools will change. HTML and CSS are going to change. Over the next few years, they'll change probably dramatically, and I would guess within 10 years or so, we might not even be using them. It might be something else entirely. But for the time being, they are the name of the game. They are the way you create a responsive website and show it to people on almost any kind of device. It is important to know them very, 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 very well. Even if you just do back-end stuff, it's tremendously helpful to know this. Our engineering team at Zurb is extraordinarily adept with HTML and CSS, and that has paid enormous dividends for us. Because they don't have to rely on the design side to get stuff done for them necessarily, and designers don't have to wonder whether the code is going to work. So that's pretty important. And use a preprocessor like Sass or less. If you're staying all day here today, Chris Epstein is talking at 4 o'clock, and he will be talking all about Sass. And you should absolutely listen to that because he's a very sharp guy. I say use a preprocessor like Sass or less. You should really just use Sass. Less is not bad. Less has a nice looking website. Sass is better. Unequivocally better. So use a preprocessor. This will make your life a lot easier, and just use Sass. And for that matter, use Compass with it. I don't think Chris is here just yet, so he can't give me crap if I didn't say that, but I'll say it anyways. You should use Compass. It makes your life a lot easier. Compass is to Sass as jQuery is to JavaScript. So if you can imagine your life without jQuery, then I guess you can imagine your life without Compass, but why bother? So if you're not a huge fan of the idea of a preprocessor, so I was not, honestly. I was kind of a Luddite about this for a long time. I didn't want to use a preprocessor. I was like, no, CSS is good enough. CSS is great. I can do everything with CSS. It really is worth it to use a preprocessor like that. Foundation 3 is built entirely in Sass, SCSS actually, but it's a variant of Sass. Foundation 3 is built entirely in Sass. It is so crazy useful, it is just ridiculous. The grid that I talked to you about, where there's 12 columns, they have a certain size, things of that nature. If we wanted to change that in Foundation 2, you have to literally get in there and recalculate a whole bunch of like really weird percentage sizes. It's a total nightmare. In Foundation 3, I can change the row width in one place, I can change the gutter size of the columns in one place, and I can change the total number of columns. And SAS will just do it all for me. It'll just take care of it. We've put together functions and mixins and things of that nature, which will just do it. And our ability to just change that for any given project, any given time, is a degree of flexibility that I wish we'd had a long time ago. It's just amazingly cool. For typography, so I'm not really much of a typography nerd, but there's plenty of people at Zurb who are. For typography, you can do some very cool stuff these days, like a modular scale, which is where all of your headers and your paragraphs and stuff are all sized based on a base font size, a base size like this, and an important number, which is kind of a weird concept, but it's basically, we use the size of the height of our tabs and stuff. It basically takes these two values and uses, in our case, the golden ratio, but you can change it to a number of like musical scales and things of that nature, and it just calculates all of your font sizes and all of their spacing, and everything just looks great every time. But it means that we have total flexibility over how we do that. If I change this to 16 as our base size, all of the text gets bigger, everything's sizing changes appropriately, everything looks nice together. I will shamelessly pimp the idea that you should use Foundation for this because the modular scale stuff all by itself is quite confusing, and we have tried to simplify that as much as possible in Foundation itself. And then you can do really cool stuff with SAS, which if you're a serious like standards nut, if you're really, really big on the word semantic and you really, really want things to be semantic and semantic, I know some people like that, you can even use SAS to do pretty awesome stuff like when I show you the grid where you put classes like 8 columns and 4 columns. Some people don't like the idea of having presentational classes in their markup. They don't like the idea of defining something as a particular size in the HTML. It makes it a little harder to change later. You have to go in and change the page itself. With SAS, you can actually use what's called a semantic grid, which is where you don't actually attach classes to your markup at all. In your SAS, in your CSS, in your SCSS, you basically say, okay, my whole body is an outer row. My main section, which is just a class of main, which is this whole big blue box, is an 8 column. It's 8 columns wide. I can say that the sidebar is 4 columns wide. And then I can say that one post, and let's imagine this is a blog or something like that, one post, which is this whole box, is a row inside the content. It's an inner row. And then I can say that the article itself is 9 columns. I can say that a figure is 3 columns. You can do some really, really cool stuff, or what SAS does is it goes and looks and it says, okay, everything that has to be attached to something to make it 9 columns wide, I'm going to attach it to article instead of having it attached via a class that was put on it. So you can pull the classes entirely out of it. Semantic grids are pretty hot. They're kind of weird to wrap your head around a little bit. But if you don't like the idea of presentational markup, SAS actually makes that possible. In fact, it is impossible to do a semantic grid without a preprocessor. You cannot do it without SAS or less. So this is the only way to get that done. So that's pretty handy. Like I said, Foundation 3 is going live today. It might be live right now. I'm not sure. I'm here talking to you, so fingers crossed. It's probably not just yet, but I swear to God it will be soon. We're pretty excited about it. It's a big, big release for us. So how do you build? How do you build in the future? How do we build the front end of the web going forward? Please just remember 3 things. Just remember three things. Build responsively, because the future is responsive. When you think about where the web is going and how people interact with other people, how they interact with digital devices, how they interact with products or services, it's all going to be responsive. And usually I have a whole bunch of slides showing all the ways this can go responsive. I don't have them in here, so I'll just tell you. This, doing responsive to like a phone like this or doing responsive to a tablet is just the tip of the iceberg. So think about Google Glasses. Think about Google's glasses. Designing for those is designing responsively. You should be designing your stuff in a way that not only will it work here, but it will eventually work on people's glasses. That it will work in their cars. Google has self-driving cars, and you better believe that people are going to want to be doing stuff while they're in those cars because they're not driving. And you know what's crazy about those things? We will probably be tooling around in those in like 3 or 4 years. Like this is not far future. This is like the immediate future. Building responsively is it's such a huge, awesome thing that we can be getting into that is just super, super exciting. God, I really wish I had the slide because it's pretty awesome. But the last time I did this, I was actually talking about considering building responsively, and it's like think about Iron Man. You all know who Iron Man is, right? This is a big room full of nerds. You all know who Iron Man is. He's got the helmet or whatever, and he's got like the heads-up display, which is the heads-up display, totally designed responsively. Has to work in a helmet. It can show all kinds of things and it has to work in a helmet. And then what I would do is I'll show that and I'll be like, this is science fiction, right? But Google's glasses are not all that different from that. That's their goal, is to be a lot like that. And of course, he can talk to his suit. He can be like, Jarvis, do this thing. It's pretty cool, right? Talking to your technology to get it to do things is not science fiction. I can, with questionable accuracy and questionable results, talk to this phone and have it do some things. It'll get better, though. It'll get better with time. You better believe it's going to get better. Think about, like, I love using Iron Man as an example because I really like the character. But you know, when he's working in his workshop and he's got all these like hologram things all over the place that he's interacting with. Pretty cool, right? Holograms, crazy science fiction. Well, you can rap with a hologram, like you saw at Coachella when Snoop Dogg came out and rapped with hologram Tupac. If you saw that, he was rapping with a hologram. It's ridiculous. He was standing there on stage with a hologram and rapping. It's crazy. So like things like holograms, things like heads-up displays, things like talking to our technology. This is not far future. This is not like what was Conan's thing in the year 2000. This is not like that. This is like 5, 6, 10 years away. This is really, really close. So designing responsively right now is designing for things like this. It's designing for these different corners. It's designing for different square, black in most cases, boxes. That's totally going to change. And this is why we have to be building out these tools. We have to be ramping these tools up because we've got to reach that point. So the future is absolutely responsive. Build cleanly. Build responsively and build cleanly because bad code dies. If you write ugly code, if you write code that's hard to read, if you write hacky code that just doesn't work all that well, eventually you'll come back to it and you'll be like, oh, I should totally refactor this and do this whole thing again, but it's such a mess and it's such a pain, I just don't want to, and then it's just toast. Or you have to hand it off to somebody else. We've run into this with clients, actually, in instances where we were not diligent enough and the code was not clean enough. We hand it over to them and they go, well, what the hell are we supposed to do with this? Ugh. And they just can't get anything done, and nothing gets done. So build cleanly because bad code is going to die. And finally, build quickly because the pace is going faster and faster and faster. The nice thing about this conference today is that a lot of the stuff that you're seeing today is how to build things more quickly. It's about tools to build things more quickly. We have to build very quickly. The pace of progress is accelerating faster than anyone probably thought that it was, to the point where developing for the web, developing like websites in 5 years would probably be completely unknowable to us right now. Like, I can't even imagine what that's going to look like. I could guess all day long. I guarantee it'll be wrong. None of us really know. It's going to change very fast. So we really have to be ready for that. So you've got to build quickly. You can't drag your feet. You got to go fast. We'd really, really like your help building out all the tools that we need. Like I said, Foundation is just one piece of this puzzle. It's helped us immensely in doing responsive design, responsive front end for things. It is entirely open source, github.com/zurb/foundation. If you get in there today, you're going to see branches shuffling around like mad as we take branches and turn them into master and God knows what else. But everything is on GitHub. We would really, really like you guys to get in there and poke around at it and tell us what else we could be doing or what could be doing better. Or even better yet, submit pull requests that I can just merge and I don't have to do it all myself. That would be great. So it's a pretty exciting time for us to be doing this. Just remember those 3 things. Build responsively, build cleanly, and build quickly. That is what's actually going to get us to the next big level. Because like this conference, Schmonference Conf 2018 or something, we're going to be doing such crazy, awesome stuff, it's just out of control. So let's all get there. We need the tools to get there. Help us build those tools. Thanks very much. More than happy to answer any questions. If you guys have any questions. Yes?
What are the size of the
Sorry, what was that?
file size for the grid system?
Oh, the file size for the entire thing. Okay, I'll be totally honest with you. I haven't actually checked it for Foundation 3 because we've been kind of going really, really, really fast. Foundation 2, if you didn't minify anything, was about 80K, I think, 70, 80K. It's pretty minimal. I think Foundation 3 will actually be even smaller. We've stripped a lot of stuff out, and there's no more required images in most cases. So we've stripped it down quite a bit. Once it's compressed, it can get pretty small. I mean, it's decent size, but it's a lot of CSS. You can't minimize it too much.
Is there, you can choose also, you can pick the plane and you can pick the UI and all those things like that?
Not in Foundation 2. In Foundation 3, yes, you can. And that's actually why this wasn't deployed at 10 o'clock like we scheduled, because the customizer was. But yes, actually, if you use the SaaS version is actually a gem. You can actually use the gem, and then you can actually just omit or include things as desired. There's a config file to do it. From the website, there's also a download customizer where you can select, I want these pieces, I want the grid to be this size, I want these particular colors, I want my text to be a certain size, all those nice bits and pieces. So, you were really fast.
So besides your own grid, what's your favorite one?
Besides our own grid, what's my favorite one? That's an interesting question. Who can I throw my support behind that's not myself? There's a lot of them out there. Semantic GS, actually, I would say was our inspiration for doing the semantic version of Foundation. So that was actually very cool work. Semantic GS by itself it's just a grid. There's nothing else really in it, so it's a little bit limiting. I don't know if you're trying to get me to say I love Bootstrap or something like that. Okay. So actually, okay, so I'll tell you an interesting thing about Bootstrap, and I'll bear in mind that I don't imagine he's watching. Mark, if you're watching. Hi, Mark. So Mark Otto, who's one of the authors of Foundation, or of Bootstrap, actually used to work at Zerb. He and I worked together. So he and I worked together on a precursor to both Foundation and Bootstrap. Bootstrap, if you actually need basically a coded style guide, like something that you can just throw together and it's going to look really good, Bootstrap is really good code. I would be lying if I said that Mark and Fat over there don't write good code. They do. They're very crafty fellows. It is, I would say, much more prescriptive in terms of what you can build. We wanted Foundation to be very, very customizable and very, very easy to override and do your own thing with, because that's what we need for our clients. That's what we need to be able to do, is do something custom every time, to do new things every time. If you just want to put something together that looks good and more or less looks like Twitter, Bootstrap is good code. So I would say in terms of the space of like responsive frameworks, Foundation and Bootstrap are two sides of the same coin to some extent. I obviously prefer Foundation because I work on it, but they're both good. So yes.
That's two pieces, but they're related. Responsive media, so video and images, and then the other piece, all of your styles with respect to the pixels, so PM and percent as all how that's split or
So I'll do the media first. So images and video, we have, there's affordances within Foundation basically to handle their sizing and their positioning and things of that nature. There's stuff that actually it'll even correctly size like YouTube embeds and things like that, which is nice. If you're talking about actually loading different assets, loading responsive assets, that is actually, I would say, one of the larger hang-ups right now with responsive design is that there's just not a great way to do it. So Foundation's entirely a front-end framework. We don't do anything on the back end. To do good responsive media delivery, you have to do stuff on the back end to identify the client and supply the appropriate kinds of assets. There is really good work going on in that space right now. There's a CSS community group that's actually working on like a picture element or a pic element, which will support different media or support different assets for sizes. I really, really love to have that right now. Realistically, it's a couple years out, probably before browser support is high enough to do anything reasonable with it. So Foundation itself won't help you deliver different assets. You have to do that on the back end, but it is a worthwhile thing to do. As far as sizes, the majority of actually the elements and such that are sized in Foundation are done with percentages. All of the grid stuff is done in percentages. Most of the elements and things of that nature are sized with percentages. We specify an arbitrary max width, basically, for the container, so that if you have a really, really large screen, your stuff doesn't just expand into infinity. You can change that to anything or remove it, which is fine. As far as using things like ems or percentages for other elements like that, ems are cool. Ems are really cool. The reason we don't use them to size things is because mostly they're very poorly understood, and they're a little bit weird, and they work really weird, which just raises the bar. It raises the barrier quite a bit for people who just want to get into this. We want this to be relatively easy to get into, which means that we have to rely on some slightly more traditional conventions like pixel sizes. That's not to say that using ems for sizing of things and things of that nature isn't a totally worthy and worthwhile pursuit. It absolutely is. We think in Foundation right now, in Foundation 3, we feel like we have a pretty good balance of things that are easy to get into and familiar and things that are pretty cutting edge and are able to do a lot. Ems are not really part of that right now, but that is a good question. Yes? Oh, sure. So he's asking, you're asking, like, does Foundation have any sort of, is there any hook between Foundation and like things like Fireworks or things like workflow support? Not really. It's mostly, Foundation's kind of funny because we developed it to basically support our workflow on the assumption that our workflow was pretty good and that other people would want a similar workflow. For us, the trick with things like Fireworks out to something else or Dreamweaver is just a good example. Is that we haven't seen any of those that have sufficiently good output or sufficiently easily controlled output to actually enable that kind of thing. It might be worthwhile for us to actually investigate now because I know like newer versions of Dreamweaver I think can support, they actually will support fluid stuff. I know they have like fluid support in them. I couldn't tell you whether it's any good or not, but there might be an opportunity there for us to kind of ease that workflow. It's not something that we encounter all that much, but it is something that other people encounter. Our goal with Foundation is that even if you do have to write the code, even if you do have to write the page, we want it to be very easy to write the page so that if it's something that's unfamiliar to your workflow, it's not like, oh God, what have I gotten myself into? It's pretty easy to manage. If you know HTML at all, you'd be okay in Foundation. It's not complicated.
Just how to think about the design process, the quick iteration, since you don't have to design for responsive design.
Yes. Yes. And I would be remiss in not pointing out that Zurb also provides an entire suite of paid tools for doing quick iterations, starting with Notable, notableapp.com. Go, tell your friends, and sign up and give us your money. There's a lot of cool stuff in that space, actually. The workflow thing is everyone's workflow is a little different. I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff that we'd like to be doing to accommodate more workflows. We'll probably get into that. And stay involved. I mean, let us know how you'd like it to work, and we'll try to make it happen. Yes, back there.
So I'll let you know that it's a great product. I redesigned the site with Foundation.
Really? Fantastic. Thank you.
Making work on mobile sites, mobile devices is just so easy.
Thank you.
So great work.
Thank you.
Wanted to know, so Foundation 3, what does that have? Foundation 3.
It's a fairly significant change, actually. We rewrote most of it, honestly. A lot of the syntax and stuff will be very familiar. Obviously, we rebuilt the whole thing in Sass, which was a pretty big undertaking for us. So that's a major change. And the customization is so much greater than it was before. It's just out of control. Like Foundation 2, if it had any limiting factors, it was that it was a little difficult to mess with like the basic structural stuff. It was very clearly defined. So that ability is really, really huge. We're also using a lot of like new CSS stuff. If you know about things like box sizing, border box, which is it's a property that ironically forces all browsers to revert back to the IE6 box model. It is like the irony of the last 10 years has been that IE6 is such a piece of crap, but its box model was actually really correct, and everyone since then has been wrong. So this dramatically simplified how we size the grid. That's actually, honestly, that in and of itself was a huge win just for using that, because previously you'd have to do like, 4 columns was 29 point blah, blah, blah % wide, and it had like a 4.4% margin, and it was just this total nightmare thing. Well, now since with box sizing border box, padding goes in, it doesn't go out. We can say that 4 columns is 33% wide. It's just 33% wide. And then we put padding on it, 15 pixels of padding on the inside, and that creates gutters for us. So you can really easily change all this stuff because we're using that property, and that was actually a big switch. Other than that, we're using modular scale for all the typography. We've added a lot of new elements and just resources, things that you need to actually build out pages. We've added a lot of that. It's an all-new visual style. So actually, if you previously built stuff with Foundation 2 and you just threw together a prototype, like it looked okay, didn't look great, but it looked okay, it'll look a lot nicer now. But it's actually, with that, it's actually even easier to override and restyle than it was before, I think. So this was a pretty big undertaking. I could talk for a while about all the new stuff in there. When the new site is live, which really hope it's soon, there's a whole big page about some of the stuff that's new. There's a migration guide if you want to go from 2 to 3 that explains the changes in the classes and things like that. I know there was a question over here. You've raised your hand. Browser support for Foundation 3. So we have tested it and made sure it works on, let me go through the list here, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, IE9, IE8. That's the end of IE.
That's what my real question was.
Yeah, I figured that was probably your question, was does it support IE6, does it support IE7? No version of Foundation ever supported IE6. We dropped that a long time ago. 2 supported 7, 3 does not. The reason for that is because of box sizing. IE8 supports it, and IE7 does not. There's a behavior file that you can include to make IE6. It's really terrible. It's real bad. The flash of unstyled content, the FAUC, it's pretty bad. We still,
What does A7 get?
so IE7 can always get Foundation 2, which is very good code.
But I mean, if you have Foundation 3,
What does IE7 get?
what does A7 get? Is it just a total crap?
It's not-
Or is it like a
It's not pretty.
one-column
It's not real pretty. Not really. So legitimately, I mean, honestly, so we were really close to actually getting IE7 to work with everything. And actually, we almost got that stupid behavior file to do everything that we needed. It chokes on one specific thing, which breaks it all. It's padding on a auto-sized element, which has auto margins as well. It can't handle the right size for it. It just... so we did drop IE7 support. Now, to be fair, we actually looked real hard at the importance of IE7 support, and legitimately, depending on what your target is, depending on what your market is, globally, IE7 market share is actually dropping really fast. It's actually down to, I think, less than 4% now, and it drops by about 10% every month, because actually Microsoft finally did a smart thing, way to go, guys, and got really aggressive about upgrading people. So anyone, even back as far as XP, who has updates turned on, they just get upgraded to IE8, and they don't even know it. So and they did that in China as well, which was a huge holdout for IE7, IE6 and IE7. So they've managed to actually really start whittling that number down. We are pretty confident that we can move forward without it, without IE7 support. In instances where we just absolutely require it, the Foundation 3 website has a Foundation 2.2.1 download, which is, it's not Foundation 3. It's still really good code. We were using it for everything until about 2 days ago. So, so we wanted to make sure that that was available.
Okay, part two. So, what is your recommended approach for? I mean, I've seen you guys have served on a whole lot of different sites and pictures and other stuff people use. What's your approach for taking up one game from getting Foundation to getting whatever side is you're actually
Right. Sure.
Is it just you're layering it on top of
Yes.
overriding what you style,
Yes.
or are you actually editing Foundation directly? Don't touch the core stuff and just override it.
We recommend that you don't touch the core stuff and just override it, because if you want to upgrade it later on, it's much simpler if you haven't mucked with it. Foundation 2 was pretty good in terms of like how much you had to override and how much work you had to go through to make it work. Foundation 3 is actually quite a bit better. The visual style itself is quite minimal. I'd say it looks really nice, but it's quite minimal. So overriding stuff is very, very easy. If you do like a custom download, you can just customize the base Foundation stuff to be exactly what you need. And then if you want to upgrade it later on, you just do a new custom download for it, and you'll still have the same stuff. When we're building, we don't really mess with Foundation. We just leave it, because we know it all works. We know it's all tested, so we build on top of that. If we were going to be hyper efficient about everything, yeah, it'd be more efficient or more optimized, I suppose. If we eliminated the styles that we're overriding from the base Foundation stuff. As far as just workflow is concerned, we haven't found it to be worthwhile. And frankly, Foundation itself is pretty small. It's not as small as like teeny tiny JavaScript libraries and things like that, but it's pretty small. We've never really had an issue where it was a critical performance factor or anything like that. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I think y'all get to eat now. Thanks.